Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at Sony FE90mm f2.8 macro GOSS in combination with Sony A7R IIIA. In my original review of the 90mm macro, I have said that it is one of my top 3 lenses that I've ever owned, and that still stands. In this video we will take a look at how it works specifically in combination with the 61MP sensor in A7R IV, with the autofocus system and the in-body image stabilization. We will also go over the usual stuff such as the build quality, the controls, and so on. 90mm is a focal length suitable for example for portraits, short telephoto landscapes, and importantly for product photography. It provides sufficient working distance for most types of macro photography. I think that it is ideal for flowers, small objects such as wristwatches, and also for insects. This is a real macro lens, which means that it can provide 1:1 or 100% magnification. That obviously makes it very suitable for shooting all kinds of details. Of course, it is just as useful for shooting non-macro subjects. I mostly use it for product photography, wristwatches, and flowers. I also occasionally use it for telephoto landscapes and cityscapes if I want the best possible image quality. FE90mm f2.8 is 13.5 cm long. It weighs 602 grams, which is a lot less than I would have expected. That is very good for stabilized full-frame macro lens. The outer construction is fully metal and the build quality is generally great, so I have no complaints in that regard. It definitely feels like a premium product. I also like the semi-old school look of this lens. Especially the blue and orange numbers on the focusing scale makes it very recognizable. The mount is metal as well. 90mm macro has some degree of weather sealing, but there is no gasket around the mount. Diameter of the filter thread is 62mm, which is pretty common diameter, but Sony users will probably use a 67mm step-up ring. Mounted on A7R IV or basically any other Sony full-frame camera, it is pretty well balanced. It only weighs 600 grams, so the whole combination is not too front-heavy. A lens hood is included with the lens. It is just a basic plastic lens, not a fancy one, but it does the job. Regarding the control elements, there is a lot of those. First of all, this lens has a fantastic focusing ring. You can switch to manual focusing by pulling the focus ring towards you. It is still a focus-by-wire system, but for all intended purposes it is at least as good as mechanical focusing. It is extremely smooth and precise. The resistance and the focus throw are also perfect. Manual focusing is quite important on a macro lens, and this one is as good as it gets. There is also a focus limiter switch. You can choose a full range, 50 cm to infinity or 28 to 50 cm. Limiting the focus range makes the autofocus a bit faster, but using full range is completely fine on modern Sony cameras. There is also a switch for turning the stabilization on and off. That is very nice to see, just keep in mind that it overrides the in-camera steady shot settings and it controls both in-body image stabilization and lens stabilization. Last but not least, there is a function button which can be set in the camera menu. So how about the optical qualities? 61MP sensor in A7R IIIA is rather demanding when it comes to optical quality of the lenses, but this is still one of the sharpest lenses ever made. The central sharpness is incredible right from f2.8. If I zoom to 300%, the contrast at f4 is even higher, and this is basically a perfect image quality in every way. It can't get any better than this, so the image quality at f5.6 and f8 is the same. There is some decrease of contrast at f11, but the overall image quality is still great. The contrast further decreases at f16, but it is still fine to use. The corner sharpness is pretty much the same. The sharpness is great right from f2.8. The contrast is again a tiny bit better at f4 when we can see perfect image quality. f5.6 and f8 look absolutely perfect with maximal sharpness and contrast. The diffraction starts at f11, but you can only see a minor decrease of contrast. The sharpness is still fantastic. As expected, FE 90mm f2.8 in combination with a 61 megapixel sensor is a pure greatness in terms of the image quality. The amount of real detail that you can get with this combination is special. That definitely translates to real-world images. I haven't had to mention the chromatic aberration in the testing scene because the amount is very minimal. 61 megapixels is the highest resolution currently available in full-frame cameras, which means that this lens is good enough for any Sony E-mount camera. You just won't be able to see the difference between f2.8 and f4 because lower resolution sensor won't be able to pick that up, so it will be perfect right from f2.8. The close-up image quality is just as good. There is absolutely no ghosting at minimal focus distance. The sharpness is still perfect and so is the contrast. I use this lens a lot for wristwatches and I am very happy with the results. Interestingly, there is some visible vignetting and a bit of barrel distortion. Fortunately, this lens is so sharp that it doesn't affect the image quality at all and it is completely fixed in camera or by Lightroom profile. Another special characteristic of this lens is the bokeh. It isn't an f1.4, but at 90mm on the full frame you can get very pronounced subject separation even at f2.8. The rendition of bokeh and the transitions are extremely smooth. Even with busy backgrounds, you won't really get harsh outlines. Interestingly, it only has 9 aperture blades, but it seems to be enough. The bokeh on 90mm macro is in my opinion beautiful. Despite that it is a macro lens, the autofocus is very good. It works basically the same as with A7R III. It is as good as any recent Sony lens in usual situations. The focus acquisition in non-macro situations is basically instant. There is no hunting and it only slows down if you are focusing from a very far distance to macro, which is to be expected. As I have mentioned, there is a focusing limiter which helps with focus speed under 50 centimeters. The accuracy is always 100%, which is crucial for a macro lens. In video it basically works just as well. The focusing is very smooth and there is no hunting at all. All of the autofocus features such as eye autofocus work of course. The focusing is not completely silent. It is not disturbing by any means, but it may be caught by a microphone depending on the sensitivity. It is possible to get rid of it using noise reduction in post. Just like all macro lenses, 90mm G exhibits significant amount of focus breathing. This lens is not very suitable for focus pulling in video, but that is to be expected. 90mm macro has optical stabilization and it can work together with in-body image stabilization in A7R IV. This dual stabilization is very effective. I do all of my exterior product shots handheld and the stabilization allows me to go down to about 1/20th or even 1/15th of the second, which is very helpful. It is also very useful for handheld B-roll video, which is definitely usable. To sum up, Sony FE 90mm f2.8 macro G OSS is optically excellent lens and it is a great match even for 61 megapixel sensor in A7R IIIA. The sharpness is outstanding and so is the contrast. The amount of chromatic aberration is minimal and the overall results in terms of the real-world images are fantastic. The build quality is flawless and it has by far the best focus-by-wire system that I've ever used. Two standout features in comparison to other long E-mount macro lenses are the optical image stabilization, which is very effective, and the autofocus, which works much like on any new Sony lens. Basically the only two imperfections of this lens are the missing gasket around the mount and a bit of focusing noise. My overall impressions are just as good as when I have tested it with A7R III. It is still my most favorite lens that I have ever owned, together with Sony FE 24mm f1.4 GM. It is definitely good enough for any Sony camera, so if you are a Sony E-mount user and you have a use for a 90mm macro lens, I absolutely recommend it. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.